Last week, so if you're new with us, we are in the third week in our series in Genesis. I don't know how many weeks it will be, but this is week 3. Last week we talked about the days of creation. How on every day God revealed an aspect about himself. We saw different characteristics of God, different aspects of God on different days. Today we're going to kind of look at Genesis 2. We're going to look at the differences between Genesis 1 and 2. We're going to look at the image of God and what it means and the implications of the image of God. And it seems like a lot, and it is, but we'll get through it together. Genesis 1, as we looked at last week, really focuses on creation in a chronological order. God did this, then he did this, then he did this, then he did this. And mankind is the pinnacle of that creation. He is everything led up to the creation of Adam. And then on the seventh day, God rested. Genesis 2 seems to be in a different order. Right? God made man, and then there was no plants in the garden. But we know that God made the plants on day 3 and Adam on day 6. So how could God make Adam and have there be no plants in the garden? Verse 19 seems like God made the animals after he made Adam. So what's going on here? Remember, chapter 1 and chapter 2 have a different focus. They have a different purpose in what they're communicating. Chapter 1, again, is mankind is the pinnacle of creation. All things led up to this moment. All things led up to the time when Adam and Eve were created. Chapter 2, man is really the beginning of history. Man is everything was made for him. Everything was made for them. Plants were made, then man. And yet nothing was in the garden yet. Nothing was planted in the garden because it's a reminder to Adam and to us that God made the garden for man, not the other way around. God didn't plant the garden and then say, well, I need to figure out who's going to tend this thing. Let's put Adam there. No, God said, I'm going to make Adam. Then Adam is there. Now I'm going to show Adam that he is central in this. So I'm going to make him a garden, and he has to tend it. Eden was made for man. Verse 19 assumes that God had already made the animals. And here he is bringing them before Adam. It's Adam's first act as having dominion over the earth. His first act is to name all of the animals. And so God is showing Adam here that he is central, that he is the one with dominion over the world, over the animals. And so he's bringing all of the animals in and saying, Adam, you are the one who has dominion. You name them. And not only that, he is showing Adam his need for a companion, his need for a helper, his need for somebody to share life with, his need for Eve. So Genesis 1 focuses on God creating. Genesis 2, God creating with man as the special creation, the pinnacle, the one who has dominion. Multiple times in chapter 1, it says that God created things according to their kind. According to their kind. This phrase is used 10 times in the creation narrative. He made plants according to their kind. He made animals according to their kind. Birds, fish, all according to their kind. Things were made according to their kind. Again, God has a limit on creation. He limits creation. This is for this. This is for this. This is for this. When he creates Adam, it's a little bit different. This is the time when there's a divine dialogue amongst himself. Let us make man in our image. Let us make man in our image. This is a subtle shift. According to their kind, let us make them in our image. But there are huge implications. Mankind is not made according to their kind. We are made according to God's kind. We are not here left to ourselves, to justify ourselves, to glorify ourselves. We are made according to God's likeness, His image, according to His kind. Now, this does not mean that we are God or we are divine, but there is a significant difference between all of creation and humanity. There's something different. According to their kind, according to God's kind. Humanity is made in the image of God. The image of God, the Imago Dei. If you've heard the term Imago Dei, it means image of God. It's Latin, and for some reason, it sounds cooler because it's Latin. And so we say Imago Dei. It's never defined. This term is never defined. And this is important because we're never told what it is. We're just told that we are the image of God. But we, as human beings, love to fill in the blanks, don't we? So I sit on the licensure board for the chapel churches, and so when a person is in training and becoming a pastor, they have to go through a test. It's a written thing, and then they get questioned by like 12 guys, and it's a fun time. It's more fun when you're the one asking the questions than answering the questions. But one of the questions that always comes up is, what is the image of God? What is it? And there are almost as many answers as there are people. God gives us in the Bible a little bit of hints here and there about what He is like, and we can look at how that compares with humanity, and we can say, well, that reflects the image. God's relational, we're relational, that's part of the image. God's creative, we're creative, that's part of the image. But there's a huge danger. Because when we define the image of God, that's not defined by God. When we define the image of God, those who lack certain qualities that we define as the image then become less important, then become less valuable, then become less image bearers. And this is a dangerous situation. So if the image of God is the ability to reason, to have relationships, to think logically, those sorts of things, what about those who can't do these things? What about the unborn? Unborn children do not have logic. They don't have reason. They don't have, they do have a relationship, but not on their own. What about toddlers? What about infants? What about the mentally impaired? Do they lack the image of God? No. This is why it's so dangerous. All of these still have the same image of God that you and I have, the same value that you and I have. The image of God is not what we do. The image of God is who we are. We need to remember that every single person who's ever been born is the image of God. The image of God is there, and it's what gives value to life. What are the implications of the image of God? Well, this is a huge question with huge implications. What are the implications? That question has huge implications. How should this impact our lives? Why is this important? Because secular humanism, what we're taught in school, what I was taught in school, is that we are the result of random processes. That cells just kind of formed, they came together randomly, and here we are. Frankly, I think it's one of the most illogical arguments that there is. But it's what is taught. And so if we are just a random group of cells that has come together, there is no value in human life. There's nothing that separates us, not even from the animals. There's nothing that separates us from this music stand. It's just a group of things. We're just a group of things. Nothing separates us. Nothing makes humanity important. And this leads us to society that celebrates abortions and makes it illegal to disturb, hear that, disturb or destroy eagle's eggs or sea turtle's eggs. If you intentionally disturb an eagle egg, you can go to prison and get fined. Now, I'm not advocating for destroying eagle's eggs. Don't go home and say, hey, let's go find eagle's eggs. But it's absurd to the highest degree that as a society we protect eagle's eggs, birds' eggs, and not the unborn being. You see that there are no court challenges, there are no protests of people saying this law to protect the eagle's eggs are unconstitutional. We have a right to kill eagles. But there are protests, there are court challenges, there are people demanding the right to kill a human life. This is because we have completely lost the value of human life. We've lost the Imago Dei. The image of God impacts us more than laws about abortion and eagle's eggs. Think of the isms that are out there. Think about the things, classism, racism, sexism. I mean, the list of isms goes on and on. None of them would exist if we understood the Imago Dei. None of us would hate other people if we understood that they were made in the image of God, that they are image bearers, that we all have the divine image. Is there any reason, is there any wonder why there are mass shootings and murder? There was another one yesterday, mass shootings and murders. When we take away the value of human life and we tell people that they are simply a lump of cells that have randomly appeared and have come together, there is nothing that we can do to protect life. There's nothing that we should do to protect life if we're just a bunch of random cells. Here's the irony of the world. We are told over and over again that human life has no intrinsic value. This is why abortion is okay. This is why, this is the result of Darwinism. This is the result of secular humanism, that there is no God and therefore we are just random creatures. There's no value in human life. And so we're told that human life has no intrinsic value, and then we're shocked when people treat others like they have no intrinsic value. How can we have a society in which we tell people human life is not important? There is nothing that separates the humans from the mouse or any other creature. And yet, we are shocked and appalled when people take other human life. Why? Because even those who claim that there is no image of God know that human life is intrinsically valuable. So society has set a trap for itself that it cannot get out of without divine assistance. And that trap is we tell people they're not valuable, and they begin to act like we're not valuable. And it is a vicious cycle that will not end until we understand the value of human life. And the only way we can understand the value of human life is when we understand that God is the one who made human beings. As individuals and as society, all thoughts and actions are answered with the question, who am I? Who am I? That's the question that we all have to answer. And how we act is dependent upon how we answer that question. Carl Trueman, in his book Strange New World, did an analysis of the history of philosophy and human identity. And it is a fascinating book. But he said the modern self assumes the authority of inner feelings and sees authenticity as defined by the ability to give social expression to the same. What he means is that and we'll get to this, but our value is determined by what we are on the inside and the ability of the inside to project that outwardly. Sigmund Freud knitted together the idea of of sexuality and humanity. And he introduced words like, and phrases like homosexual or heterosexual or sexual orientation or sexual identity, words that have become very common in our vernacular. We all know what they mean. Before Freud, they didn't even exist. But Freud came along and he said, these are identity markers to who we are. You are defined by your sexuality. You are no longer a person, you are a homosexual person. You are a heterosexual person. And because of this, the individual identity is tied to our sexual identity. And so we must be accepted by society in order to be validated. We see this in the world today. We have to accept people for who they are sexually, otherwise we won't accept them at all. At least that's their understanding. This is why there's so much angst about this subject, because a sense of worth is tied directly to whether or not an individual's sexual identity is accepted. Because to the extent that society either prohibits or invalidates a person's desires, it prevents them from being authentic. So if you say, well, I am a homosexual, and society says that's wrong, then because of Freud and how that has slipped into the human mind, you are now not a full person. You now are less valuable. Authenticity is a key word today. Are you being authentic? Authenticity refers to the matching of our outward actions to our inward thoughts and feelings, our inward desires. So if who you are outwardly is the same as who you are inwardly, then you're authentic. Now, and we'll get to this, but as followers of Jesus, we know that that's a huge problem. A huge problem. Carl Trueman, again, as he's talking about today's society, said that the trans person who is born male but claims to be a woman is to be lionized because this is an act of courage and honesty whereby the outward performance is finally brought in line to the inward reality, despite what society might say. We could add biology to that too, despite what society or biology might say. Now think of where we are, how we got here, and how it relates to the image of God. If there's no God, there's no image of God. If there's no image of God, there's nothing outside of the person that gives him or her value. If there's nothing outside, then we have to look for something internal. If we take away the standard that has been there since God made Adam and Eve, and that is we are made in the image of God, He is the standard. When we take that away, there's nothing concrete, there's nothing objective that we can look at and say, what does it mean to be a human? And so we then have to start looking on the inside. And so what we've done as a society is we've given the idea that the matching of inward feelings to outward actions is the barometer of self-worth. Thus, if who we are is determined by how we live, it is absolutely and utterly cruel to not accept a person's lifestyles or actions. Because in their mind, we're actually telling them that they're less human. We're taking away their understanding of the image of God, and that God is the God of self. Yet as Christians, we understand that replacing our identity as image bearers with our actions and desires is actually an attack on God Himself. So if we say that my value is based on what I do, then I'm telling God, one, that I know better than He does, and two, that my image is more valuable than His. I'm made in the image of me. I don't want God's image, I want my own. That is absolute blasphemy and idolatry. But society says that there is no God, so morality is just fluid. It's fluid and it's according to the individual. Whatever the individual thinks morality-wise, that's what works for them until it impacts somebody else. But universal morality is actually seen as unjust. Universal morality is seen in our culture today as something that's used to oppress others. So universal morality is done by those in power, and it's a construct done by those in power used to oppress those who are not in power. This is why there's an absolute adverse reaction today to institutions, to the man, to governments, to whatever, because they're seen as oppressors against the true self and who the true self wants to be. Karl Marx, who has much influence in today's culture, said, "Morality is historically conditioned and designed to justify and maintain unjust current economic structures of society." Morality, hear this, morality is designed to oppress. If morality is not based on an absolute, but is a man-made construct to oppress, then it has no value at all. Not to be done by Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche said morality is a fiction invented by one group to denigrate and subordinate another. So here we have two men who have had huge influence on our culture today, saying morality is a construct that is done to oppress individuals, completely taking God out of it, or at best calling God an oppressor. God, by creating morality, has oppressed people and kept them from being who they want to be. And see the dangers here, right? If there's no God, there's no morality, there's no standard, then anything goes. You may be wondering, I thought we were talking about the image of God, and now we're going on all these little rabbit trails. What does this have to do with the image of God? It has everything to do with it. Because if we're going to have conversations with others, with those who disagree, with unbelievers, we have to understand where they're coming from to have meaningful conversations. We have to grasp what's happened in the way that the society thinks if we're going to have conversations. I've heard people say things like, "I need to find myself," and they disappear for a while. After high school, I had friends who they went and hiked the entire Appalachian Trail, and I assure you, they came back very different people, and it wasn't for the positive. But they left because they needed to find themselves. I know a guy who just left his wife because he has to find himself. He's 53 years old. He has to find himself. When we have no identity, it leads to confusion. Society tells us that we can't fully know who we are until we're able to live out fully who we want to be, or what we want to be, or how we want to be on the inside. And as Christians, we understand the danger of this, do we not? All of us are born sinful. We have a sin nature. We have sinful desires. All of us are born in rebellion against God. All of us are selfish, prideful idol worshipers who do not want to bow to anybody, especially God. And it takes the Spirit to change our hearts. This is humanity as a result of the fall. And so when we teach that our outward actions must line up with our inward desires, we are headed for a disastrous situation, one that can be seen today. And yet this is what we as Christians are saved from. This is what we're freed from. We are freed from our sinful desires. Sin no longer rules over us. Instead, because of Jesus, our corrupted understanding of what it means to be human is brought fully back into line with what God made us to be, His image bearers. When we understand that we are made in the image of God, we see more clearly our purpose. We see our value. We see the objective standard by which we are to live. This does not mean that it's always easy. It's not. But it is a moral compass that is ingrained in each of us. Hear this, and hear this, please. You don't need to find your identity. Kids, you don't need to find your identity. Your identity is given to you. You are a child of God made in His image. Our society or our identity is not my sin, is not my action, my athleticism, my failure, my success, or anything like that. My identity, your identity is not based on what you do. It's who you are as a child of God, as an image bearer. And we, because of Jesus, are brought back by him and adopted into his family through the blood of Jesus. The world tells us that our identity is psychological or fluid, that there's no objective meaning to the purpose of life, and yet that is contrary to what we know scripturally. In our culture, your identity is who you think you are or who you think you should be. And this is why biology now has nothing to do with gender. They're not the same thing anymore. How do we get to that? Because your identity now is who you think you should be, not who God made you to be. And this is why anything that has a negative impact, a refusal to accept what a person says about themselves, regardless about what biology says, is seen as a weapon that can do severe damage against somebody. Refusal to accept somebody's sin is seen as the worst type of attack a person can experience. The anchor to the question of who am I is and always has been the image of God. And society has taken away that answer, that anchor. A person does not think that he or she can look to the Bible or to God for the answer to that question. Because there is no objective standard to which people can look to for identity, we must look inward. And this is why so many so-called churches have strayed from the Bible. They think that by accepting and even celebrating sin, it brings people to Jesus, and in fact, it does the opposite. It will not. It never has. And every denomination that has tried to do this loses its light. This is not easy. Hear this. This is not easy. There will be pushback. There is pushback from society and the world when we stay faithful to Scripture. But this we must do and we will do. We must teach our children that they are made in the image of God. No matter how old they are, no matter how old you are, tell yourself that you are made in the image of God. You are valuable because of who you are as an individual. You do not need to, nor should you look elsewhere for your value, for your identity or affirmation. When we understand that we are made in the image of God, we understand what goes along with that. We are the crowning glory of God's creation. All of humanity is. Do we mess up? Absolutely. This is why we have Jesus. This is why he came and paid the price for us. Psalm 139, 13 and 14 says that he knit me together in my mother's womb. Before we were born, God knit us together. You are not an accident. You are not the result of random processes. You have inherent dignity and inherent value because you are made in the image of God. And we have to lead others in our identity. We are children of God, created by him to bear his image in the world. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, black or white, gay, straight, male, female. It doesn't matter. You are an image bearer of the Most High God. This is your identity. Period. What you do does not make who you are. We often define ourselves by our own mess-ups, by our mistakes. I am, fill in the blank. I'm not going to tell you mine. But we have this idea that we are defined by our mistakes, and yet God says, one, I see you as my child, the perfect Son of God. That's who you are. You have value because God made you. As we understand the Imago Dei, as we understand that it has been given to all of humanity, we will love others, and we will love others better, and we will know and love God better. Many of the ills that we face as culture are the direct assaults on the image of God in humanity. And as a church and the people of God, as we understand the Imago Dei, we will better be able to address the issues in our culture. We have to lead the way. Help people understand their value because of who they are. The Imago Dei is the only sure foundation for human rights. It is the only sure foundation for human value. We are committed as a church, we are committed to protecting human dignity and respect because we are all made in the image of God. We all possess, we all are the Imago Dei.